So I'm here with the elder mastermind himself, Nick DiSalvo. How are you, my friend?
Good, man. Thank you for asking. How are you doing?
Yeah, good man. Just got back from work and ready to delve into some good old prog. But how have you been kind of decompressing after the seemingly never-ending tour with Pallbearer that you guys just went on?
Yeah, it's been quite a marathon between that and the two tours that preceded it. And I had a whole total of 3 days at home before I left again for another 10 days to help a Belgian band called Fire Down Below with their new record. I was kind of doing like production help. I don't want to say I was the producer, even though that's what they hired me for. Since I don't really know how to produce other than my own music. But yeah, I was with them in studio for another 10 days, and that was pretty intense. And so yeah, I just got home basically for the first time yesterday, and I'm starting the decompression process, whatever that means, which is basically like one day on the couch and then right back to kind of fiddling with my guitars and setting up home recording stuff and thinking about whatever's going to come after that.
So are you kind of one of those people, I guess, that's sort of like, Devin Townsend, where they can't really switch off, and you're kind of like, okay, my creative synapses are kind of flaring up again, and all that sort of stuff.
I think I definitely have times where I don't have trouble turning off that, or maybe if there's like nothing inspiring, then there's just no reason to like really try. But after being on tour for the better part of the last half year, I really felt like I had enough like input from outside, and we had traveled a bunch and done a bunch of new stuff, and but also played the same set list pretty much every night straight through for 100 something shows. And after that, I was really like itching to start working on new music again.
Mhm.
So this is definitely like, yeah, one of those periods where I'm like really raring to go and start the next thing again. And it reminds me of like how we used to do things pre-COVID, is that like going on tour and traveling and that whole like experience would always just, I'd always come back feeling tired physically and but like somehow refreshed creatively. Like it's like you gather all this input from outside and you don't even know it, but it's like doing something in your head, and when you get back you've got like all sorts of different ideas.
Mm. Fair play. Yeah, yeah, that sounds pretty plausible. So I'll kind of delve into Innate Passage. When was it that you kind of thought, okay, now's the time to make a new record after Omens?
We immediately started work on the new record, or I pretty much started writing songs right after we were done with the batch of Omens material. I still vividly remember, yeah, I think the day that Omens came out, um, we had kind of just learned that the country would be shutting down here and that like tours weren't going to be possible. And I remember like I think sitting in a park or sitting on my balcony with Mike and Georg, the guys who are living in Berlin, and just kind of being like, well, shit, I guess, I guess we could start on the next record, and already like starting to like organize ourselves and look at the ideas that had been started prior. Because normally it's not that we like finish 5 songs or whatever and then start a fresh batch. There's always like a ton of songs going on simultaneously, and some ideas make it to one album. Some will like be held off for a further album down the road.
Yeah, it's almost like the sort of not the roles have been reversed, but like normally you put a record out and then you go on tour and stuff, and it was like, okay, we'll put a record out and then write the next one and then go on tour after that.
Yeah, yeah, and very much. I mean, like also, for the longest time, it was really just a nebulous area where no one knew when we'd be able to play shows again, and so the pressure was off to do anything at all other than so. Especially with this album, it was very much like, let's start writing, but like also it's cool we don't have to plan any albums around like tour schedules or
Mhm.
what anyone is telling us. Oh, we've got a pressing slot here. If you want it done by then you have to get the masters delivered by then. It's very much no pressure, low stakes kind of. Oh, we have as much time as we need to make this record because who knows when we need to put it out.
Yeah. Did that kind of like sort of drip feed into the writing process where you were kind of like, we've got a bit more time, so we can just kind of play with as many riffs as we want, basically?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, like funny enough, a couple times we had recording time booked and had to like reschedule because there were like new travel restrictions that came into play. So our bassist, who was living in the States, he couldn't come over, and that bought, and we just kept having more and more time where we ended up just keep revising and revising the songs, because we were like, okay, well, we have another like 3 or 4 months now until the session, so like, why don't we have a look at this part, or like maybe we can do something cooler here. Which can be maddening at a certain point when you just want to go record the damn thing.
Yeah. I can imagine. And like, is there kind of a temptation to kind of overpaint the picture, if you know what I mean? Like you're kind of like, oh, maybe we don't need that there, or and it, because you're letting it sit for a while, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And even one of the songs that was like one of the, I think it was maybe even the first I started working on after Omens, it was going to be on the record. And then I think just a few weeks before we went to record, I woke up and I was like, I don't like this song. There's too much shit going on, or just like there's too many synthesizers or something doesn't fit. And I just like got rid of it and started writing a new song and had that one finished in like 2 days. Stuff like that also can happen too. There's really no rhyme or reason. I guess I've kind of forgotten how every song historically for us has taken shape. So it could be that that's always just been the case.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, if you sit with something for so long and every day I fire up my computer and I look at the project files, because we're like recording and making demos as we go. And there's always like, oh, here's a little part that only has, 25 wave files instead of 30. Like maybe I can add a couple more layers there. At a certain point, you definitely need to. And then you see that too when you get into the studio and you record a part and the engineer's like, cool, that sounds great. And you're like, okay, yeah. And then there's going to be a synthesizer here and like 2 more guitars. And they're just like, do you really need all that? And then you realize for the first time, like, oh no, of course we don't need all that, which I just kind of experienced, funnily enough, on the studio session working with this band, that like oftentimes we'd finish a part and I'd be like, man, that sounds great. And they're like, oh, we've got this lead in this thing. I'm like, why do you want to do that? Like, you don't need all that.
That's interesting. So it kind of like completely flipped it on its head with you being in the producer's chair. Now you can kind of see their perspective.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. It's a fresh perspective is sometimes unwelcome, but sometimes like, necessary. I get very set in my ways about every song being just the way I think it should be. And it takes a lot for me to kind of remove an idea or change something that I'm very set on. But it is good to hear other people's perspectives. And I guess ideally that's why you like have a producer, right?
Yeah.
But,
exactly. Did that sort of happen? Because I know you recorded this album at Clouds Hill. So was the relationship with the producer kind of similar to that? Like they were kind of like, well, why don't you try this? Or, or was it kind of like come into the studio, play, and then.
Yeah, we self-produced this record. We very much didn't really have a producer. We had a wonderful engineer named Linda Dog who did a great job tracking everything and helping us realize like what we wanted to do. But in that sense, we were the only ones directing ourselves, which is kind of how it's always been. I think with the engineer, unless you've got an external producer, kind of already plays that role. Or, if you want, like we've recorded some records where the engineers have had awesome ideas and some where in retrospect, I think they had shit ideas. And but Linda was very much like hands off in that way, which was great because I felt like I definitely had in particular, or we had maybe even collectively like a good vision for how this record was going to sound. And we didn't need anyone else to like steer us in any one direction.
Absolutely. So what was, because obviously I'm a massive Mars Volta fan and I know about Clouds Hill and all that sort of stuff. What was it like kind of, being around that sort of energy? Did it kind of give you guys even more creativity or?
The whole vibe in that studio is just awesome. Like the Mars Volta thing was less of a big deal for us. It was because none of us are really huge Mars Volta fans.
Mm-hmm.
But there was definitely that kind of mythology hanging around, and Omar and some friends were there for most of the time that we were there. They just be, and it is a totally open studio. It's like a live-in studio with an apartment, and then the studio is one floor above it, and you have 24-hour access to the studios. So, and there's multiple studios. So like it could be after dinner sometimes or late at night, like someone would want to go experiment with sounds or practice their parts for the next day. You'd go up and Omar would be in the middle of a recording session, like in the middle of the night doing some weird shit. And that certainly was cool. You felt like you're in a small bubble of creativity where there's just no real rules. You can work on whatever, whenever. And it's a very kind of like very free place in that regard. Some studios, they're just like, okay, we lock the door the minute you're out and like, don't touch our shit. And it's nice being in a place where I'm sure they want to know exactly who they're working with. And if they can be trusted, then they're given full access to everything to work as creatively as they can. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons, aside from like all of the awesome equipment they have there, that makes that studio really cool. I would definitely love to work there again.
Okay, so do they have? Because I've always felt like Elder's sound is very sort of analog driven. Like, do you guys record? I literally know nothing about production and stuff like that. So, like, do you record in an analog way? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, like we use. We set up our instruments and mic them, and usually we've always recorded into places that have analog recording desks, so everything is going through like analog preamps and a desk, and then it goes into the computer where you can like manipulate it further. I guess at this point we've never done like a record straight to tape. Most studios these days work kind of hybrid, so some stage is digital, a lot of the equipment is analog, but you're doing a lot of like the editing, of course, 100% digital. So I guess, yeah, we take the best of both worlds. For what we're doing with such really detailed and very textured music, it would be damn near impossible to do that completely analog, but we definitely take as much from that world of sound as we can. I think it's also important for like kind of realizing our vintage voiced modern prog rock or whatever.
Yeah, man, 100%. I think tone has a huge amount to do with, Elder's overall, not even the sound, just kind of like the vibe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why I don't identify with any modern prog rock bands or like, maybe the closest thing is something like Opeth, but even that is not really a band that I'm super familiar with. Because I really, I want us to, if we're going to be pushed into that, prog corner, I'd rather be there as like a modern reinterpretation of like the 70s bands rather than, Dream Theater or Devin Townsend or something like that. Obviously, we're way less complicated than that, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, there are like King Crimson-esque bits and like, ELP, yes, all that sort of stuff. That's kind of like the vibe I always get when I listen to Elder.
Yeah, I mean, that's all bleeds through somewhere, just a little bit riffier and maybe a little bit less talented on the whole.
But I thought there was a little bit more elements of like krautrock coming in through Innate Passage this time around.
It could be. I guess everything kind of finds its way in eventually. There's, I think, a pretty healthy mix of some kind of groovy parts that just expand and flow, and some of the harder riffing that was in the previous records. Couldn't say how much of that is attributed to any one influence at this point, but I probably listen to more, krautrock than stoner rock at this point, so it's natural that would find its way in somewhere.
So what was it like? Because this was, did you call him Geo earlier on? Is it George?
Oh yeah, Georg, exactly.
Georg.
That was good.
That's how you pronounce it, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. So this was Georg's, like second record with the band. So kind of, did he bring new ideas, some kind of like different vibes? Was he sort of like let off the leash a little bit, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I noticed a huge difference between the way our chemistry was on Omens versus this record, because we had just had this kind of lineup change, and Omens was written, Georg joined the band, and we kind of threw all these parts at him, just just maybe a couple months before we went into the studio. And this time we met very often during the writing process, Mike, Georg, and I, and Jack was, working digitally with us, just trading files back and forth. And I would bring the parts to them and we would just check them out together in the practice space we have here. And everyone had a chance to kind of like take the songs as I'd imagine them and then re-envision them, put their own spin. And also definitely just for a drummer, it's important to, if I'm at home just like programming drums on my stupid little pad, and then I give that to him, obviously he needs to do something much more creative with that. And yeah, so he's definitely been able to, and I think he's found his voice within the band a bit more.
I also feel kind of like there's this weird kind of oxymoron of the sound being really meticulous, but also kind of quite free and spontaneous as well. Is that, do you think, because you guys, you said you met up and jammed and things like that, it's kind of like quite a fine line that you guys walk, I feel.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the magic. Or if it comes across that way to you, then it's great, because that's kind of what we're trying to do. It should be music that is, everything is more or less very structured, but it doesn't come across as mechanical. It still should feel organic and have a kind of like breathing feeling to it. And to be fair, that every riff is very locked in and kind of meticulously composed before we recorded, but there is a lot of stuff that we're improvising in the studio, and there are parts where we say like, okay, let's write on this for like however many bars, and we know it should end here into the next part, but how we fill in the blanks is very much just playing around in studio and jamming. And especially Mike is great at that. He's kind of the guy who, if there's like a blank, we just like, all right, man, try something here, and half the time he comes up with something really brilliant for it. I think that's probably half the reason why the albums don't seem so super like track by track recorded. And I think I've definitely read people saying that like, oh, it sounds like four guys just jamming, like getting high and like jamming. It's like I couldn't be further from the truth, but I'm like so happy if that's the way it comes across.
That's awesome though. Yeah, because you're right, man. Like it really does kind of in some ways feel like it's a seamless sort of journey kind of thing, where you just kind of you press play and then off you kind of go. It sort of ebbs and flows and things like that. But what was kind of like what on the new record, for example, can you sort of pinpoint a couple of cool things that were actually spontaneous and they were completely like there on the spot, improvised?
I mean, pretty much every song has probably a couple of those moments,
Wow.
like I think most of these songs nowadays have a longer jammy portion, which I'm aware of, and I feel myself getting like annoyed that I'm falling into kind of like a songwriter structure, because I don't want that to be our thing. But a lot of those portions have just kind of like guitar leads, or a lot of the keyboard stuff was very much like not written in, but added on later, like just kind of, again, having to do with Clouds Hill and just having like tons of equipment everywhere, just being able to run over and be like, okay, let's take this like Wurlitzer piano and see if this works. Or like, oh, there was even like a lady from France who was recording some piano record while she was there, and we grabbed her on one day to jam with because we had an idea. It didn't make the album, but like, these are the kind of things, really. But off the top of my head, like the second half of Merged in Dreams, this Innate Plus Ultra section, a lot of that was just improvised in studio.
Wow.
And it didn't end up at all the way I thought it would. I'm still wrapping my brain around it, to be honest. But like this whole synthesizer section, yeah, that was intended to go in a completely different direction than it ended up. We're going to try and like turn it into some sort of like crowded out, very mellow thing. And it ended up just being this huge build with like some spooky piano that Mike just had the idea to put down. and then ending up being like, nah, fuck it, let's bring back this big riff at the end, you know. So
it's I think of all the record, that's my favorite track, Merged in Dreams and No Plus Ultra. It's just it's so sick, man. Like I'm a sucker for a really long track as well, to be fair.
that's well, you have a unusual attention span.
What would you say is the most demanding song that you guys tracked on the record?
I think everyone had their stumbling blocks, and there's usually like some part for everyone that's a little bit more difficult than it could or should be. Um, I really had the weird feeling to like fly through this record. Like I think when I was recording guitar, I had the feeling like I know every part, everything just is like the way, because we'd been rehearsing this record for a long time, like, and jamming it together. It felt very comfortable to me. I think there were a few times where like the drums were getting sticky because it's hard to always, you know, like we record drums first and then we try to put everything for the most part on a grid, which means like recording to a click track. And like sometimes to get like that right organic feeling is really difficult if you're not just playing with everyone, if you're just like playing, you know, by yourself in studio. And yeah, I don't know. For me, there wasn't really a song that I think was more difficult than the rest. There were certainly a couple vocal parts that I had trouble getting like to the point where I was super satisfied on this record. Maybe that's like my new like you know, challenge myself thing.
To be fair, I couldn't play the guitar parts and sing the way that you do. So, like, you know, hats off, mate.
Well, don't worry, I don't have to play and sing at the same time in studio. There, at least you're a little bit off the hook for that.
Just live, you're just like, oh my god, why did I do this?
Yeah, and that's also a problem with writing guitar parts and then writing vocal parts and then later figuring out, oh shit, I have to play this and sing it at the same time. Like this is harder than I thought.
But you always seem to pull it off, right? So it's, you know, it's, I guess it's one of those things where you just think what would benefit the song the most, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we don't want, I'd rather like write the best parts for the song and then just bite that bullet when the time comes, you know, just like sit down and practice the same thing for, you know, 3 hours straight every day for a week until you got it. It's really just muscle memory to a certain degree.
Fair play, man. What so kind of talking about vocals and stuff, what you know, did you kind of try and do anything different that you might have not done previously on albums when it came to your vocal style or anything like that, or when you were recording?
Yeah. I mean, for one, I think I have come to like accept and embrace my voice. I also realized like weirdly well, it's not weird. It's actually very normal that like your body is growing throughout your entire life or like developing. And I just don't really have the voice that I used to, like these kind of like throaty, half shouted sung parts from Dead Root Stirring or Lore. It just doesn't really feel natural to me anymore. And I think Omens was the kind of turning point for me where I was like still holding on to a bit of that old delivery style, but also feeling out like, how would it be to just sing? And now I think I'm fully on the other side of the fence where it's like, you know what? Like, I think I understand like what I can do with my voice and I do enjoy singing and not just, you know, just kind of like shedding off the last bit of that, like very throaty, very intense vocal style that used to be the kind of thing and just trying to use it more as an instrument with actual melody and, you know, use that to the advantage of the songs in its own way.
Okay. So did you kind of start out as the singer as kind of like you know, okay, well we need a singer, I'll do it kind of thing? Or
exactly like that, yeah.
I
think
like
we had that conversation. It was very short.
well,
like the drummer can't sing, obviously that's ridiculous.
Well, I was gonna say, like, you know, like knowing you, I was like, I feel like it was definitely going to be like that. You're just like, well, I can do it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, yeah, it's definitely like the first record too is like, I mean, okay, we were just teenagers, but you know, songs about Conan the Barbarian and like nonsense. Even that, it took me a minute to realize like, okay, well, how about like writing lyrics that matter? And then the next thing was, okay, how about writing vocal parts that matter, you know? And then how about singing like it matters? And just, it was a very gradual step for me as like a guitarist and not a singer to grow into my own as like a singer as well, and to really enjoy doing that,
Yeah, man. That because I mean, you're doing two instruments, really, aren't you? Like there's so much discipline that comes with lyric writing, like learning how to sing, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, hats off to you, man.
Thank you. So I mean, it's just self-taught like anything else, but hey, I think it really is just like in a weird way, singing is a very personal thing, more so than guitar playing. It's like an extension of your physical, body. So I'm not like a manly man or embarrassed of myself, but some like bearing that side of you, and especially like writing lyrics, can also be very personal. That's like definitely the stuff that I've struggled with over the years, and I feel more and more comfortable, with every album, I think, in both those regards.
As we kind of, been talking about, finding your voice as a singer and things like that, obviously something else that comes to that is lyrics. And what are some of the themes that are explored on Innate Passage?
A lot of it is, well, I think I had a sort of idea to make this one less heavy in some way. And because, I found myself like answering interview questions for the past albums, always saying like, yeah, it's about like the death of civilization and like environmental destruction and like life and death and morality and blah, blah, blah. And that is like what I'm kind of interested in, but that also gets exhausting for a while. And I thought I'd maybe make some songs that are more just kind of like stories or vignettes about like current, I don't know, like not like current happenings to a certain extent. Like there's just kind of like the bizarre, strange world that we're living in. And I don't know if like you've had the same impression that I have the last couple of years, especially, that like not only are things getting progressively like worse in the world in kind of like every measurable metric, but they're also just getting like, sometimes it feels like shit was just like totally off the rails. Like between, I don't know, like between the pandemic was obviously a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, that like this could happen, or all of a sudden like this is reality. And that in like, Trump's America, or like, the rise of populism across the world, with people just straight up like denying reality to a certain degree. Like be it like, COVID denialists, or like vaccine skeptics, or alternative facts, just like, all the shit that was happening on a daily basis in like the news cycle. And it just felt like there was a lot of like craziness in the world all at once, and that people were just kind of like losing their shit, and that a lot of people were just like living in their own little reality, and that like more and more that was just kind of the way the world's going. Just like it's a lot of shit, it's hard to process, people are more and more retreating inside their own minds, it just like attaching themselves to like their version of reality. So I wanted to give a short answer. I guess there isn't really one. Some of the tracks are stories about, like, there's one song, the opening song is about a good friend of mine who lives in the Pacific Northwest of the States, who had recently had to flee from his house because there was like a crazy wildfire that broke out and basically enveloped like the entire area.
Wow.
And he was telling me about like driving down the highway in the middle of the day in like complete darkness, and looking back and just seeing like Mordor in his rearview mirror.
Fucking hell.
And that really was like a story that kind of like stuck with me. And so I was like, okay, this is kind of like the perfect subject matter for this record, just these like vignettes from a kind of like world gone mad, or like a very strange world that feels so different than like what I perceived it to be as a kid, very stable and normal. I'm sure that's like not the case at all. Every generation thinks that like, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but, and yeah, some of it's just straight up about like, growth, introspection. That's the whole deal with like the passage theme of the record, that like, it feels like people are just kind of like on their own passage through space and time and reality. And it seemed like a nice way of wrapping up all of these themes. It's not a concept album. It's very much just kind of like scattershot topics, but I think dissected like that, probably everything is like a song that someone can relate to in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely, man. I 100% agree that the world has gone absolutely fucking crazy.
Yeah. I do wonder if it's like temporocentrism that we just think, uh, it's crazier now than it's ever been. But like it really does feel that way. And
Yeah,
I think it's just kind of like trying to not laugh at that, but like, take that for what it is and turn that into like, well, okay, imagine we're on like Borges, like a magical realism novel or something. Like this is the state of the world, and like let's think of it in those terms. Like this is some sort of like bizarre book that I'm reading right now, just to kind of lighten the mood, and then use that as kind of like fuel for the creative fire, if you will. But yeah, it feels like a system's like, hey, to borrow a line from one of the songs, system breaking down. It does feel like there's like feels like we're on the brink of like or we're seeing systems kind of like melting down in real time too. And yeah, it's interesting times.
it is, man. It is. And I think, I think it's important that people have music to kind of escape from this. Because, like, personally, I use music as a bit of an escape to just kind of turn everything off and just sort of veg out for like, I don't know, 45 minutes or something like that. And I'm sure that Elder, do that for a lot of people.
I I mean that's really nice to hear when we do hear that. And yeah, I mean we get messages often enough saying like thanks for putting out, even like Omens, thanks for putting out a record the pandemic. It really like helped me get through it. And it's funny that like we never thought about pulling the record because of the pandemic, and that was just kind of like a really nice thing to hear too, especially because I never thought that that's how like some people would perceive it or use it as like therapy or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, man.
Yeah, but why not? I mean, I use music. Well, I listen to music every day, all day long, anyhow, just to kind of get me through everything. But yeah,
So what is it that appeals to you about prog? I've wondered this for a while.
within like the rock world, I think I just like it's not even that I'm like so enamored of prog rock, and that's like the only thing I listen to, but um I don't know. I just really liked it as a very free kind of genre.
Mm-hmm.
It's you, if I'm like staring at my record collection right now and just like kind of like mentally going through the catalog, I'm just like I think also just like growing up with straightforward rock music and then kind of getting into like prog rock a little bit later in my getting into mostly like my 20s really.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of blew my mind wide open of like how I always thought that like music it was like too noodly to be effective or whatever. But just like some of the ideas that come out of just like letting yourself go, it's yeah, it's just like liberating. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why we have this like, or I don't. I mean, I guess I understand why like the current short rock song format became the dominant one. Probably has to do with like attention spans and radio airplay and stuff like that. But there's just like so much more that can be said with the song outside of that. And I don't know why you'd have to adhere to it. And also just having um, or having linear song structures that just kind of like go and go and never repeat anything. It's like, I don't know, I guess that's kind of like what classical music used to be like. There's really there's really no reason we can't apply that same thought of like telling a story as opposed to just like verse chorus bridge, end part or whatever.
Yeah. But equally, though, I think there's a lot of like anchor points in Elder's song. There's always like a melody that kind of comes back, and you're like, oh yeah, I heard that like at minute one, and now I'm hearing it at like minute 14, kind of,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, we're certainly not without some level of repetition,
Yeah,
but it's nice to have those callbacks too. And that's kind of a hallmark of our songwriting at this point, that like a theme will be introduced and then it'll come back somewhere later in a different form later on. And you might not even like consciously realize that you're like, oh, there's like, this feels familiar somehow. Why?
yeah,
It's like, oh, it's the same idea, just like turned on its head a little bit later.
100%. There's so many moments where I'm always like, wait, how did I get from there to here?
Yeah. And that's also, I mean, part of the fun of songwriting. I find it a lot more. It's very gratifying to write songs like that, and it's also very gratifying to hear, prog songs that really pull that sort of stuff off, and just to hear how clever a lot of musicians can really be, and the stuff they come out with, especially talking about like the '70s prog giants. Yeah, and sometimes it is just like the sheer fun of standing bathing in someone else's like total mastery of an instrument and being like, wow, how did they do that? And this was before we have all the like the studio trickery that we have now.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they were really good then.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, man. So, as a kind of final question, like, if you were to, what would you want fans to kind of take away from Innate Passage, if there was anything that you'd like them to take away from?
Um, I don't really know. I don't know if we've ever made a record with the intention of like being pedagogic or like telling anyone any certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people enjoy it. I mean, it's always a weird, like, just a few days away from release day. As we're filming this, it's like always a weird feeling, like, oh, you're about to like put this thing out into the world that you worked very hard on and thought a lot about, and um, it's exciting, but it's also kind of like, okay, like, what are people going to think?
Mm-hmm.
And but no, I don't really know. I mean, in a certain way, I'm also like I said, I already kind of passed it thinking about like the next project to work on. It's always the time warp, especially with like how long it takes to put out an album these days, that you're just done with something like a year before it comes out.
Mm-hmm. So you're already onto
Yeah.
the next.
In the words of Bill and Ted, be excellent to one another and party on, dude.
Awesome, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Tris. Always good to catch up and hear myself
Awesome.
blather on incoherently for an hour.